Hi Mark, so thanks for meeting with me today. I'm Grant from Paramount Independent Property Services. We're the South East's largest provider of short-term temporary accommodation, and we specialise in housing vulnerable and homeless families. We've seen quite an increase in homelessness in Kent, and there's extra pressure on local government organisations to house these individuals, and we feel that there's maybe not enough partnership working with local developers, local landlords. Especially in Kent, we're seeing that more and more we're being invited to meet with local authorities to sort of break down them barriers. And that's just in Kent, and we've now sort of expanded to Sussex as well. We're having them conversations, and it seems to be quite a effect across the South East. I don't know what it's like around here, but we've just got a few questions to go through with you, Mark, just to see your feel on how we are with the housing crisis and housing in general. So do you think there is a solution to the housing market, or is that question itself flawed?
Yeah, I think the whole question of the housing crisis and the solutions to the housing crisis fundamentally come back to a pretty simple solution, which is that you need to build more houses. If you go back to the Barker report of '03, Kate Barker identified that you needed something around in the order of 250,000 new homes or completions every year, just to keep pace with demand at that time. I think it's sort of generally accepted that that number hasn't changed that much. But ever since then, you know, we're in 2018 now, so pretty much 15 years ago. Ever since then, we've been way below that number in terms of the number of houses that have been delivered, or the number of properties that have been delivered every year, new builds. So, you know, the numbers have sort of dipped right down, sort of 08, 9, 10. Picked up a bit now, but we're still not at that level. So, you know, how do you build more houses? Well, successive governments have said that they're going to do that. The Conservatives have sort of said, even in recent times, that they're creating, you know, new funds and, you know, new schemes in order to do that. But what seems to happen each time is that they offer new money or they create a new scheme, but it is usually just a drop in the ocean. It's not enough money. The scheme isn't big enough. It doesn't go right to the heart of the problem and create a sort of you know, a real shift. It's sort of tinkering around the edges. Often they're just trying to score political points, and they don't seem that committed to actually creating enough housing supply, which would then mean that this sort of theory of the housing crisis you know, subsides. I think it is also a question of the type of properties and in which areas as well, because, you know, we think of the UK as a property market, but the reality is it's like a load of countries, you know, within, you know, a big island. You know, the north of England and Scotland, they're like a completely different zone with a completely different set of rules from central London. And yes, there is, you know, clearly a shortage of property in central London, but I don't know, if you went out to sort of the valleys in Wales, I don't think you'd find the same issue or to the same extent, and the same pressure on housing, pressure on rents and capital values. So I think it's about creating the right homes that people want to live in the right areas, and you know, probably government taking the issue, genuinely taking the issue, and putting enough money in it to actually solve the problem, rather than create headlines in newspapers.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Do you feel that everyone has the basic right to a home?
Well, I'd like to sort of caveat. I think they do, but I also very much believe in the individual taking responsibility for their own lives. Now, of course, some people, and I imagine quite a few of your tenants, or you probably don't call them tenants because they're nightly clients, you know, they probably don't have the opportunity to do that, maybe I presume there's quite a lot of sort of alcoholism and drugs and other things that are sort of sending them off the path. But I think it's very important that sort of take those people to water, but you sort of can't get them to drink necessarily. So get them on a program to get them off the drugs. A program to sort of get them off the drink. I think people have got to work. I think that's important. Yes, easier said than done. But if you go and claim sort of job seekers allowance, it's not just a handout like it used to be. You actually have to go to job interviews. You need to go and try and find work, and if you don't, the money stops. And I think it's important that that government and society doesn't just sort of create these handouts and not provide the other side of it, not provide the support to encourage people to get to work and take responsibility for their own lives. Because I think the people that can sort of break that cycle and get out of that bad situation will be a lot happier, a lot more fulfilled, providing to society, and they'll be generating tax to hopefully help solve these problems for other people.
Is the cultural expectation of home ownership in this country now just a historic curiosity? We aren't experiencing a dip, but a permanent shift for future generations?
Well, I think this takes us back to the first question as well. I think younger people today are less interested in buying. Some of them want to buy. If I was sort of 18 again, I'd be trying to get back on the housing market or trying to enter the housing market as quickly as possible. But that's not the case for many young people today. I think, they appreciate the fact that they can sort of move around. They're more footloose. The employment market has changed. There are structural, long-term, probably permanent changes in that, people are in work for less time. They move around. They move between different industries and have several different careers over their lifetime. So they generally move around the country more. And I think for that reason, and we're sort of more part of a throwaway society where people have things for a shorter period of time and, want changes and probably change, their families. There's more divorce. I think people want to move around more and want to rent more, or lots of people do. Clearly, there's still, certainly with the middle-aged and older generation, there's certainly still more of a mindset to own your own home. And, they believe that's important. And I believe it's important. That's something that I would want to do. So I don't think the housing crisis is, entirely down to a lack of supply. I think, there may be certain parts of the population that maybe don't save for a deposit because they spend it on other things. We're in a consumer society now. And I think if you look back to maybe, our parents, maybe they were spending less money on other things and maybe they were saving more for that deposit. I don't think a deposit that, younger people need to save for, or the size of that deposit has necessarily got that much bigger in real terms in lots of areas of the country. Yeah, in the southeast and London, it's gone up a lot. Houses are many, many times incomes, but in lots of areas of the country, that hasn't changed that much in the last sort of 20, 30 years. I just think the propensity to save, you just need to look at figures coming out of the Bank of England. Certainly, with our younger generations, is reduced. And I think that therein lies a very, very fundamental shift in our culture. You notice, the schemes like Help to Buy that enable people to reduce the size of their deposit in order to get on the housing market, and that's helped a lot. Help to Buy has genuinely helped. There's been quite a few other schemes that have, they look good, but they're all show and no go. Nothing really happens. But I think Help to Buy really has pushed people in. I think lots of people, they may say they want to buy, but I think they don't want to buy enough to, go without the meals out, the holidays abroad and everything like that to save the deposit. and they don't actually go and do it. So, yeah, how much do they really want it?
I'm definitely sort of seeing now that we've got quite a lot of staff employed, a lot of young staff, that it's a month to month living that they have. That a lot of their contracts and rents and things like that, it's all month to month. There's not much annual savings anymore.
It's a much more short-term consumer society that I think we live in. You know, we've got, I don't know, 60, 70 staff in this building, and they are younger. And we've definitely seen a shift, even in the last sort of 12 years since we've been running this business. You know, we offer a pension scheme. And yeah, you know, people are sort of getting more into their 40s, 50s. They're more interested in that. But, you know, the guys in their 20s upstairs, lots of them, they're not really interested in the pension scheme, even though we you know, they get it, and obviously they get the money automatically. But they're not interested in sort of, quite a few of them, supplying more of their salary to top it up, even though there are big tax breaks. And there's a lot more, let's live for sort of now and today, and, well, tomorrow we'll sort that out later.
Or the next holiday.
Yeah.
People talk about the generation rent, as we've discussed, and how difficult it is to get on the property ladder now. Do you believe this? What would a young Mark Homer do to get on the property ladder if you had an average income?
I'm quite clear about what I do, and you know, any children of mine, I will encourage to do the same. So, what I would look to do is to go and find probably a 3-bed house, Victorian, something like that. You know, cavernous, good size. Probably not so much a new build, because the square footages are smaller and there's less opportunity to do anything to it. I'd try and find something completely knackered that requires work, but mortgageable. I'd go out and I'd try and get the sort of biggest mortgage that I could on you know, salary. I'd obviously go and get a job, save like hell to get the deposit, and then I would move in and I would rent all the other rooms out to individual sort of HMO tenants, but you know, I'd be living there, so it's slightly different. There's obviously a government scheme where you can take a certain amount of rent in and not pay tax if you're living in the property. There are mortgages that you can get that enable you to do it. Bath Building Society does one. I think it's great from a tax perspective. I think you'll end up sort of adding value to the house if it needs some work on it, and you could do a lot of the work yourself, or sort of get trades in and be there and manage it yourself. So I think it offers a great way into the property market. I think for a young person, it enables them to get experience managing tenants and making sure the rent's paid and making sure the maintenance is all sorted. I think, you know, you get some good capital growth out of it over the medium term, and then, you know, as I sort of, you know, want to build a family and get a bigger house, then probably move up, and obviously, you know, sort of the tenants move on. I'd use the equity out of that property to sort of buy the next one. I've seen a couple of pals do that. One of my friends' dads encouraged him to do it, and I watched how it worked, and it was great. It was very, very good. He you know, had to help him a bit. He guaranteed the mortgage. Obviously, you know, he was quite lucky. His parents were able to do that. But you know, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I think you just need to sort of save to get a small deposit together.
I definitely felt when I left education and when I started out as an apprenticeship, that the biggest issue I had to overcome early on was managing money. Because although I was working and doing an apprenticeship, I also had sort of 4 other part-time jobs. And I don't think education in the UK is really developed in helping young people manage money. Some people get inheritance or get a lump sum, or some people will just give someone a lump sum of money to move out and privately rent. And I do think that is a contributing factor to a lot of young person debt, because they've never really been educated in managing money at a young age. Even the business study qualifications that I did when I was very young never really helped you managing money. It's only when I've now run my own business that I'm now re-educating myself in managing money and cash flow and balance sheets and finance. I definitely feel that the education sector could really contribute to that, and it would then impact on, reduced debts for young people, and we just do seem to keep borrowing a lot of bad debt all the time. Did you feel the same? That education could be moved on to a new generation for young people?
Well, I think there probably should be something in the national curriculum around, how money works, and obviously you can do economics at, GCSE or A level, but I think there's something more fundamental in terms of personal finance, and sort of, how to, reduce the costs, in terms of your living, how to invest it properly, how to get good returns, how not to sort of go off the rails and end up in, debt and have sort of credit at very high interest rates and all that sort of stuff. I think that is very, very important. I do hear a few people say, oh, well, you should just sort of get rid of school and, you should just have a sort of financial education. I don't believe in that. I think, maths, English, some of the languages, things like that are very, very important. So I think this should be slotted in with them. But, when I was at school, I learnt Latin once a week. Okay, great. If I was a doctor, it might be useful. But I really can't think of many practical applications for me of learning Latin, over the last, 20 years since I've been in the world of work. So things like that, I think, maybe need to go and, maybe needs to be updated with a modern personal finance grounding that young people sort of get from an early age, and it just becomes part of who they are. If you get into the right habits early on, then as they go on through life, they're probably just going to roll those habits through, and they haven't got to then make some more painful choices later on and painful changes to who they are.
Okay, back to property, Mark. Should the property sector drive its own high standards and aspirations, or is this the role of government, talking about sort of floor areas, architectural quality, parking spaces?
I believe it should come from industry, or the property investment or development sector itself. I know government is regulating more and more. In the last 3-4 years, we've seen more new regulations than we've seen in the whole time that we've been in this business. I just believe if the government allowed more competition and more landlords into the sector, then the standards of the properties has to go up. If I think of HMO rooms, there's always more HMO landlords coming in, and I constantly hear from people in our office, oh, there's loads of HMOs, or the market's flooded, or I've got rooms empty. Well, and you don't see this with single lets as much. HMOs are quite susceptible to this, and I suspect nightly rentals are even more towards the in this direction. The key to it is to have a better room than everyone else, maybe with an ensuite, and just to take the spec up, get an interior designer in, make it look amazing. Obviously, all the standards need to be right. The fire needs to be, bang on. You need to make sure all the inspections are done properly. Rubbish, give them their cycle spaces, all this stuff. I just think, certainly with HMOs and definitely on nightly rooms, you can get much higher rent. There's a great incentive to push the spec up. So I think if government could focus more on incentivising landlords to push the spec up because they get paid for it and they make more money out of it, I think everybody would be happy. What's going to happen with all this, and we're seeing it already, and yes, I'm opposed to it, and I'm quite vocal about how these tax changes and the regulatory changes, they're annoying, but some of them probably needed to come. I mean, a smoke detector in a property, that's surely a reasonable we've seen lots and lots of extra sort of regulations come along, and obviously landlord taxation increased quite a lot. And all it's doing is putting landlords off. Lots of selling now. Much less new landlords are coming in and buying. And therefore the rental stock is reducing. And we saw this prior to Thatcher. We saw when Labour sort of, brought in and maintained these protected tenancies and, regulated the hell out of the sector and effectively put rental caps on. Landlords exited the sector and you saw the quality of the properties reduce significantly. Maybe we're not going back to those days, but I can already see the amount of competition is reducing. 3 beds here, let's say 10 years ago, £450 a month for a little ex-council 3 bed. 2 or 3 years ago, £550 a month. So they went up £100. Quite a small rise. I'd say that was largely due to competition. The quality of those properties definitely went up. In the last sort of 2 years, they've gone from £550 to £750 because of all these changes. And I can just see they're just going to keep piling up. There are minimum standards in terms of, the quality of the properties, and there's more licensing. The council are now making money out of the licensing. Central government's making more money out of sort of the taxation of landlords. So rents are going to keep going up. There's going to be less choice. I think people will sort of meet the standards because they'll have to. But I think in terms of doing anything else for the tenants, they won't have to because there's going to be a lot less competition. So in many ways, this will make it more profitable for existing landlords, I believe. But it isn't. It's almost all bad for the tenant, apart from the fact that because there's more licensing and more more sort of inspections and licensing thresholds on HMOs is sort of increasing, or more HMOs will be caught by it. I think in terms of sort of safety standards and fire and general management regulations, I think there'll be better adherence and better compliance with the regulations. So I think that's a good thing.
How has the housing crisis changed your experience of how communities feel about proposed housing development in a both truly local and wider national sense?
I'm maybe not going to sort of be the most popular person for saying this, but if that was the case here in Peterborough, we're in a relatively low value area, a lot less schemes would get started because there is in the local plan, it says that sites over 14 units, 30% must be affordable. But what you'll find is when you go away and do a viability, most sites are not viable with that amount of affordable. You just can't sell the properties around here for enough money. Once you've paid all the costs of building, obviously they've been going up a lot. Brexit hasn't helped, sterling hasn't helped, extra regulations don't help. So, it's very much a balance, and the more affordable housing requirements, that there are in this area, the less sites that get started. And we've gone through periods here where there's just been a severe lack of new housing starts because sites are not viable, they're not profitable. That's going to be a completely different story across different parts of the country. Clearly, as you go more into the southeast, the margins are much greater. So the sites are viable, but obviously the land values need to react, sort of go up in unison with that.
I definitely feel in the north, obviously the construction costs don't really change that much. The materials, bricks cost the same in the north as they pretty much do in the south. So a lot of them sites, and there is a lot of brownfield sites sort of tied up in the north, which if there was maybe a change in policy, maybe we could start some regeneration in the north. Because the sites just don't stack up, the viability.
There's so many in the north that just doesn't work, and then just start piling sort of affordable housing on, and SIL and 106 and all this stuff, it just makes it even worse. And the developer in the end just says, well, I'm not doing this for my health. You know, I need to make some money. Well, what's the point? Why would I take the risk, and why would I bother?
I definitely feel like we're going to open the doors a little bit more in Kent and show communities how sites work and how it has to stack up to make it viable. The builders will still need paying for the materials, will still need purchasing, and we're going to show a little bit more how, like the smaller developments, how they need to stack up to us to even produce properties for people to live in. I think that's going to help us bring the communities a little bit closer.
Well, I think the current government have been focusing more on reducing some of these contributions for smaller sites and smaller builders, and I think that's been quite positive. Certainly below 10, you normally don't have 106 contributions. Sometimes there are other contributions, but that's been quite good. And I know in this area they've reduced some of those contributions in the last 2 or 3 years quite a lot, which has definitely helped. And it's got smaller sites started because, of course, they can be the sites where the margins are more marginal. It can be difficult because you've still got some of the same fixed costs. So if you've got less units to spread it over, the profitability can be challenging.
Do you feel the affordable housing model works? And what is your experience of affordable housing in your area?
Some of the sites do have affordable. Lots of the developers here choose to make an off-site contribution. I've seen that quite a lot because the affordable can hit the values of the market housing that they're creating, and therefore it sort of hits the GDV. I've got quite a big site at the moment. That's certainly a road that I would be looking to go down. But when we do have clusters of affordable housing around the town, the specifications of those are higher than the market housing. They're bigger. The driveways are bigger. The room sizes are bigger. And I'd say some of the materials and specifications are better. Doesn't necessarily mean it makes it viable. So yeah, there are some I think there are some successes around here. It's all about money, isn't it? If they want a lot more affordable housing, central government's going to have to put a lot more money into probably taking the bull by the horns and building a load of social housing themselves, or giving housing associations the ability to do it. I know housing associations have been doing more and more. Lots of them can borrow very cheaply. They're doing big bonds, and then they're using that money that they've obtained at very low rates to develop social housing themselves, and then let them, which is obviously been a positive thing. But I think they need more money to do it.
Mark, your social media followers will be very much aware of your petition regarding tax changes and increases. Our company provide accommodation for homeless people, and we've seen them numbers increase. Do you believe the tax changes are one of the causes of this?
I think the tax changes have been the biggest reason for the increase in homelessness that we've seen right across the country. It's no coincidence that as LHA is reduced, as universal credit has come in, as we've seen landlords who own properties in their own names unable to offset all the mortgage interest against the rent. And as we've seen stamp duty increase, the 3% surcharge on new properties that landlords would buy, there have been less properties available to rent. Lots of this hasn't kicked in yet. The biggest change is the inability to offset all the mortgage interest against the rent. That most landlords won't see the effect of that until January 2019, because that's when they'll file that return and pay that tax bill. I think at that point it's going to become more and more obvious that their tax bill's gone up a lot, and they're going to be talking to their accountants. So I think that is definitely that is definitely driving more homelessness, and more and more landlords are unwilling to take tenants on LHA or tenants that are homeless because the rent is reduced so much. We used to get more LHA here than we did private market rent. Now it's the other way around. Yeah, it was probably another £100-150 a month on a 3-bed, and that's why we all did it. And I got a lot of grief for doing it. A lot of our landlords would say, well, this person hasn't paid and they've knackered my house. And I'd sort of remind them that they were getting another £1,500 a year. And to a large extent, we just went with it. When that started to reverse, there was no incentive to do it anymore. So that was huge, and that came in before these landlord tax changes. But the landlord tax changes are the sort of icing on the cake. It's the final nail in the coffin. I know very few private landlords now that will take LHA, homeless, whatever, unless it's the council standing behind it, and giving a lease, and paying the rent directly. I think that's a different scenario, and you guys are obviously in that position, which is great, but I just think it's all going to come round. I think councils increasingly are going to have to contract directly with landlords if they want to get properties, because it's just been made very unappealing by central government.
Okay, so would you say this is a good or a bad time to be in property? There are many landlords leaving the sector. Should they?
So I sort of have this contrarian view, and I also have a very long-term view. So when I go and invest in most asset classes, and especially property, I'm doing it for a sort of 20, 30, 40-year view. And I believe it's just as good a time now to invest as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The difference is how you sort of set your sail and how you angle your property business to make it profitable when changes come about. And I think that's the most important thing. We had lots of people telling us in 2009, 10 that property was going to be the sort of death of us, and they looked really sorry for us when we said we were in property investment, and thought we'd sort of be really having a tough time. And in many ways, yeah, the capital growth was difficult, or should I say the value of the properties dropped a lot. Obviously, borrowing money was really tough, but rent strengthened, and we got more tenants because less people wanted to buy, and we got the properties very, very cheap. Sort of since 2011, 12, all the way through to probably 2015, 16 really, the market has grown a lot. So you've had a lot of capital growth, but more landlords have entered the sector, and rents calmed down quite a bit. There was a lot more competition. So in a sense, it was probably less good for the existing landlords, better for the tenants. We're coming back into a period now where we're going to see very strong rent rises, more portfolios coming on the market. Great opportunity to buy them. Clearly, you can still put them in a limited company. Put them in a limited company, you're exempted from much of these tax changes. You can still offset all the mortgage interest against the rent. We buy a lot of commercial buildings. If you buy commercial buildings and convert them, you're liable for commercial rate of stamp duty, which is much, much less. So that sort of removes the 3% surcharge. And if you're buying a portfolio with multiple dwellings, you can actually get multiple dwellings relief. There are some ways to get your stamp duty down to 1% and not pay the 3% surcharge, but you probably need a specialist to help you do that. So I think there are ways of navigating this, and if you can fix the issues that are putting other people off, it then means you end up being able to buy, quite a few properties cheaply. You get better yields, better rent, better yields, better returns. So yeah, this sort of period is I shouldn't say I like it, because for many people it's not good, but it encourages me and it makes me want to invest. Yeah.
Some really good advice in there, Mark. You may have noticed in the news recently there's been some changes in the cabinet.
Great, brilliant. I have strong views on this as well. Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say if property is no longer your aspiration and you want to get into politics and you end up in that cabinet, what one single change would you bring to government to help assist with the housing crisis?
Okay, right. So what single change? Well, I think as we're touching on the cabinet and the reshuffle, I think property is a huge part of the economy. I think the property market has stalled in the last couple of years. A large part of that is due to the uncertainty around Brexit, not the reality of lower GDP or less sort of exports, or it's really just the perception and the lack of confidence, which has meant that GDP growth has been more like low 1%, 1 to 1.5% range, whereas the rest of the G7 is growing at more like 2.5%, due to lack of confidence. So I think the one thing that they could do is create certainty around Brexit. I think Theresa May needs to get the axe out. Sounds like this weekend she took some tough decisions. A couple of them have gone. I think that's great. Fine, she needed some Brexiteers on the cabinet. I think she's still got one or two. But they need to toe the line, they need to behave, they need to operate with collective responsibility. If they're not doing that, she needs to sack them, and she needs to have a very, very clear vision of what the negotiation is going to be with the EU. I think I voted to remain largely for economic reasons. Okay, fine, immigration, lots of people weren't happy about immigration. Maybe the country couldn't sort of take all the numbers of people coming in. I think that has reduced a lot in the last few years. We're still part of the EU. We still have free movement of people, but the government seem to have been able to curb the amount of people coming to this country outside of the EU and within the EU. They clearly have got mechanisms to reduce and control it. Sounds like they've been going too far in some cases, i.e. Windrush. I think if the government had sort of taken the opportunity earlier to find ways of reducing certainly illegal and some legal immigration, i.e. take people in based on a points-based system, take the people that you want who help the country economically rather than the ones that you have to support. I think they did have the opportunity to do that. I don't think they took it. I think the population got more and more upset with that and various other things, and this is the result. I suspect if you took the final deal back to a vote, that there would be a good number of people in this country that may not want to do it if it was a severely tough Brexit and it was going to hurt them in the pocket, which is what the result of this is going to be. We reduced trade linkages, which have been built up over hundreds and hundreds of years. These guys are on our doorstep. That's why we trade with them largely. America's great, Australia's great. The empire was great when we had it. Australia and America are miles away. It costs money to move goods to those areas. We don't have an empire anymore. So we're operating in a completely different world from when we weren't in the EU. So we need to have, these 500 million consumers that we can trade with within the European Union. I think they need to protect that, create certainty around it. If that means being in the customs union and continuing being in the common market, fine. Clearly, we're going to lose a load of influence in there now. Everyone was told that before the vote took place. I'd love to see what people actually think about it now. I know a straw poll upstairs of our staff who voted for Brexit, a lot of young ones. They're now all saying, "Oh, we didn't realise what we were doing. We didn't necessarily understand it. It doesn't seem like a good idea now, and we don't want to do it." Obviously, there are lots of people that did understand it, but I think these are very complicated questions that even the politicians don't understand the effects, or what's going to happen, over the sort of medium to long term in terms of the decisions that are made now, because we're testing something which it's something new, and you haven't really got a model to base this on. So it's quite reckless. We're having a sort of live test of coming out of a major trade bloc, which provides employment and economic activity and money in people's pockets. And why would you take the risk? What are you going to get? All this supposed control over whatever. I just suspect we won't have the control anyway. These decisions are made for us anyway, and you're sort of taking very, very big risks for a very unknown and probably inferior result, as is becoming clear.
Well, there's definitely been a lot of uncertainty, and I think there's a lot more to follow. So we'll see how that unfolds. So on a local level, sort of local policy changes. I've definitely seen in Kent there has been a drive to reduce empty homes, get a lot of empty homes back into use, and we've had some success with that, with bringing some empty homes back into use for maybe some households with affordability issues, so they can live independently with us, and we can help them get back into the private rented sector. Have you seen any sort of local drive to sort of bring empty homes back into use, or local policy changes at all to help landlords work in partnership more with local authorities?
Yeah, so we have an empty homes officer, and I saw a letter from him 2 weeks ago to my business partner Rob, just saying, you've got this flat, it's in town, it's empty, we want you to, tenant it or not make it empty anymore. The reality is he's renting it out on a nightly basis. It's not empty, it's being utilised, but the empty homes officer just wants to know that so that he can encourage it back into use. I can think of a few properties in the middle of town. They're just sitting there. They're going to rack and ruin. And the empty homes officer is quite rightly trying to get the owners to repair them and rent them out. I've met a lot of this is about education. I've met a couple of people who said to me, "Oh, the problem is though, if I rent it out, I'll just have to pay tax." And you sort of try and explain that the concept of tax, all right, maybe not under Jeremy Corbyn, but the current taxation system would mean that you're still going to get to keep. You're still going to be sort of keeping maybe 60-70% of the rent that you collect, as long as you structure it in the right way. So you're still going to be better off. And I think there's that sort of attitude. And, there's a few older people who have got sort of properties here. They don't want to rent them out because they believe tenants will trash them. So I think they need to be pushed towards a good letting agent who's going to get good tenants in, manage it properly, make sure they follow all the regulations, and they're probably not going to have major maintenance bills. They're going to get rent in. Once they get into it and they start getting this monthly income, I think they're going to quite like it. I think it's great that we have these officers. We came across one in Corby a little while ago. I bought a property. This property had been smashed up by the local kids. They kept doing it. We got it cheap because of that. I think we paid 35 grand and it was worth 80 because they just kept pummeling this thing. So what we did, we put sort of guards over all the windows, shutters, and we refurbished it. And as we bought it, the Empty Homes Officer sent quite an aggressive letter saying, you will refurbish this and you will bring it back into use and yada, yada, yada. And then at the bottom it said, by the way, if you do, we'll probably give you a grant. So I rang him up and he said, yeah, we'll give you half the money, up to, I think it was up to 10 grand refurb. So that was great. So we did it. I left shutters on. We found a tenant that, let's say the property would normally rent for 500. We said to the tenant, right, we've got problems with the local kids. This property's sort of been targeted in the past. We're going to refurb it. The deal is we're going to put you in at £300 a month rent. So you're going to get a £200 a month reduction, 2.5 grand a year in your rent. We won't take the shutters off until you're in there. Here's the number for the police. We think as soon as you're in there and you're living in there, it's not empty anymore, it'll stop. We had a bit of trouble for 2 weeks and then it stopped. So that worked quite well. The Empty Homes Officer gave us some money to refurbish the property, so that was brilliant. But I think that's how they're, if they can use a bit of carrot to get the landlords to refurb them, that's great. I've seen it a couple of times where there was one in particular, the council actually put the property in the auction and sold it. I guess they'd sort of warned the landlord about the condition of the property, and I think it looked to me like the council got several charges on the property because they'd been doing works to the property and then putting a charge on to secure their money. It's a good thing, isn't it? This reduces homelessness and, in a small way, contributes to reducing the pressure and the size of the housing crisis.
Good thinking outside of the box on that Corby one. So obviously where we're based in the South East, we're looking to expand to other areas. As a business, sometimes that can be quite scary by buying properties or land in areas where we've never operated before. We don't know the local markets. Have you ever ventured outside of your sort of stomping ground or where you property invest? Have you ever invested in other areas, and how would you sort of test the market maybe before you invest in areas you're not certain on?
Well, I have done. I started investing abroad. I went to sort of Bulgaria and Florida and various different places. Didn't have good results because, with hindsight, I didn't really understand the market. I wasn't there. Are they bad property markets? No. There are a load of Bulgarians out there making a load of money, and there are a load of Americans making a load of money. But when the Englishman comes in and is there for a week on a holiday, he sort of knows 5% of what they know, so doesn't end up with the same deal. And often, I ended up losing quite a lot of money in Bulgaria. So my Florida experience was similar. We've invested in Wellingborough and Corby, which are 40 minutes down the road. Great, I've got some houses there. Do I buy a lot of stuff there now? No. Every time I travel, every time I go further, it means I've got less control. Refurb guys, can't necessarily go there. I can't drive past it just to sort of check it's okay. We have a letting agency here to manage everything. Management becomes a lot more difficult. Yes, we do Wellingborough and Corby, Northampton, because we've got a nucleus of properties there. But I've seen people scattergun all over the country and, it usually falls apart. So I don't like it. I believe property is a local business. I like having local knowledge I tend to focus on an area and just keep chipping away trying to buy buildings in an area because, we have economies of scale. I can put a lot more marketing into finding a certain type of tenant for those sort of properties because I can just keep piling them into more and more buildings in the same area. I like vertical integration. You can vertically integrate much more efficiently if you're focusing on a reasonably tight geography and a reasonably tight property type and tenant type. I think it's much more efficient. I think you end up with greater profitability doing that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Really great to meet you. Took some great bits out of that interview, and we've got lots to take away from today. Thank you.
It's great to meet you, Grant. I've really enjoyed sort of giving you some ideas, and yeah, I wish you luck with your business. You're obviously doing really, really well. Thank you.